Okay. We'll go ahead and get started. If you would, please hold your questions until after the presentation, or we'll address the questions at the end of the presentation. We've got a lot of slides we're going to be covering in a short period of time, so we're going to moving pretty quick. As noted on this slide, this session is approximately 8% of the CDT exam. And so a lot of the questions may in fact be in the form of A201 general conditions. So this is an AIA approved class. These are the learning objectives that we're going to be talking about. We're not going to spend much time to go through those. And this is kind of a session outline that we're going to want to cover. So you can see in this slide, or you can see on that slide where we were in the life cycle process. All right, contract award. Next slide. All right, so the first thing that's going to happen in the contract award is a notice to proceed. That's generally a letter of intent or a notice of award. That notice of intent or letter of intent is separate from the notice to proceed. The notice to proceed establishes the date of commencement for the project, and that's very important for you to understand contractually. So just understand the difference between those two terms. Next. Okay, contractor's mobilization. The contractor's first on-site activity is mobilization, which occurs after receipt of the owner's notice to proceed, which we've talked about. So there are several elements that are part of the contractor mobilization, and those are all listed here. You'll note on this slide that it has a red plus sign. So if you're new to the program, just make sure you commit to memory these slides that have the red plus sign, and in particular the ones that have a double red plus sign. Next slide. Contractor site verification. The contractor should verify and document the existing conditions prior to beginning any work, including, this should be included in mobilization. It's very important to document existing conditions, particularly in renovation projects, so that it's very clear if there's existing damage that is documented. And that verification should include the record drawings and verification of that. Submittals. Requirement for submittals, the standard contract the contract will typically stipulate that the contractors to prepare, review, and forward submittals to PE for review. That's a very important concept, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But contractually, the contractor is obligated to prepare those submittals. It may be assisted by other folks in generating and preparing submittals, like material suppliers or subcontractors, but it's important for you to understand for the CDT exam that it's the contractor's obligation to provide those. The administrative and procedural requirements are going to be contained in the conditions of contract and Division 1 specifications, and then more specifically in Division 2 through 49 specifications. So it goes from general to more specific. And that's kind of talked about or illustrated in this example. And this, you probably have seen this graph or this graphic before, and it shows the relationship and kind of the hierarchy of the Division 1 general requirements and then the general conditions and how they impact even the part 1 of the general or the specifications. Next slide. This is extremely important to remember that submittals are not contract documents. So this really should have a double plus sign on it. And if you go back to the A201 document, you'll see very clearly in there that it's specified that shop drawings are not contract documents. The Article 1.1 talks about what the contract documents are, and then specifically Article 3.12.4 says that submittals are not contract documents. So very important concept for you to understand. Next slide. Next slide. All right. So the next slide. Submittals basically convey information about systems, equipment, and materials. They're an important part of quality assurance, and you will remember from the previous sessions that quality assurance occurs before the work is completed, and that's in many cases the last line of defense. So it's very important to review these submittals and make sure that they address all the issues and concern. Again, we talked about who prepares those submittals. They are prepared by suppliers or fabricated, but they are submitted to the AE by the contractor. And again, that's a contractual responsibility. Next slide. Pre-construction submittals. One of the things that's highlighted here and underlined is the preliminary submittal schedule. This is a baseline for a lot of claims for delay, so it's generally outlined by architects to be provided by the contractor. And if you're a construction administrator, you're going to want to make sure that this gets submitted as part of the pre-construction submittals. This is very important if you're trying to mitigate or try to defend a delay claim later on. In addition to that, you're going to want to ensure that the contractor provides a subcontractor and product list so that that can mitigate or minimize the number of substitutions that might occur later on. Next slide. All right, the submittals are broken down into different categories. Action submittals are things that require action or review, includes product data, shop drawings, and samples. Next slide. The next category is informational submittals, and a good example of that might be NOA or product approvals that are required in Florida. Another example is roofer qualifications or manufacturer's approval from the roofer or from the roof manufacturer. One of the things that's very important is if architects receive MSDS sheets, which you commonly get, those should not be reviewed. Those should be simply returned to the contractor and not processed. And we should document that they weren't reviewed in the transmittal back to the contractor. Next slide. Closeout submittals include the record documents, and that is expanded not just the drawings that are marked up or annotated, or the specifications that are annotated, but it includes a lot of other documents. It's important to note that the record documents are not referred to as built, because that is, a higher level of standard or accuracy, and so the correct term is record documents. It may also include special warranties, and a good example of that might be a roof warranty or extended performance warranty for a particular building element or system. Next slide. Construction submittals also include maintenance manual submittals. Those are part of the record documents. May include attic stock and spare parts, and generally that will be spelled out in the specifications as what those requirements are going to be. But it's important to look ahead when you're preparing specifications and making sure that you don't overload the owner with a lot of attic stock. So just be cognizant of what percentages or requirements that you might spell out in your specifications. Next slide. The submittal review. The A201 contracts require that the contractor review and approve the submittals before transmittal to the AE. That's a very important concept. You'll see there's a double red plus sign here. in time, and sometimes that's the value of that change is going to occur at a later date. You may not know what the cost of the actual work may be until you actually get completed with the work, and so that's when a construction change directive might be used. If you uncover and damage a plumbing line that wasn't shown on the record documents or the survey, then a construction change directive might need to be issued to, keep the project or utility in place and get it repaired. Change orders directed change to be made with the contract sum or adjustment stipulated, and the owner, very important, the owner must sign the change order. However, the AE does not have to sign the change order if the costs are disputed by the AE. Very important concept to remember. Next. Substitutions during construction. You've talked about substitution requests during the bidding phase in the previous sessions. There are substitution procedures that are spelled out in the Division 1 specifications. And sometimes you may have a product that's no longer available, or that there's a long lead time or a reason for having a substitution, and so those need to be evaluated. But all parties should sign that substitution request form. That's a good process and procedure for you to mandate as part of your project specifications. Because the sub-consultant or subcontractor that's proposing that, or the manufacturer, has some responsibility to making sure that that's an equal product as well as the contractor.
Just as a clarification too, that these forms were handed out in the last session as part of your handouts.
Okay. The following situation should not be used for AE processing or reviewing of substitution. So if it comes through as an RFI, it should just tell them to submit it as a substitution request. Again, the request should not be part of a shop drawing. It needs to be a separate and standalone document. The request needs to be reviewed and approved by the contractor. So that's very important. Oftentimes when I show that substitution request form to the contractor and they understand that they have to approve it, they suddenly go back and find a way to provide the product that's specified. Again, if you have a substitution procedure, it should include a comparison of the substitution and the specified product, and that's important for you to make sure that that's in place. Next. Again, there may be reasons for when substitutions are necessary. Again, if you have a product that's not available or it's going to affect the product delivery schedule, products may change, the model number may have changed. So those are good examples of when that will occur. Next slide. Evaluation factors for substitution request. Does the substitution comply with the contract documents? Are there higher maintenance costs or life cycle costs that are affected by that substitution request? So those are things and criteria that architects should be reviewing. If the substitution's been researched and documented and it's determined that it's acceptable, then that information needs to be documented by the AE on that substitution request. If rejected, then the contractor is going to proceed or should proceed with the originally specified product. One of the things that's very important in Florida and condominium associations is that if you don't document substitutions during construction, then the building or the homeowners may come back and file a suit against the architect for making that change and not living up to the contract documents, because those are formal documents, part of the condominium association documents that are filed with the state. Site visits and observations, double plus sign, make sure you understand the difference between observe and inspect. And there are two times that the architect does inspections, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. Again, the AE is going to make periodic site visits to endeavor to protect the owner's interest and keep them informed and observe the quality of work. They're not there to perform the duties and responsibilities of the contractor. The standard owner-architect agreements and standard conditions of contracts typically stipulate that the AE perform construction contract administration, and there are inspections that are required, and those occur at substantial completion and final completion. Those are the two times that an inspection is actually conducted. So that's very important. It's at the bottom of that slide. Next slide.
Yeah, another key component to remember is that you can only reject defective work. You cannot tell a contractor while they're installing something to stop doing it that way. You cannot stop a contractor from doing work, but the nice way to tell them is, if you continue doing it that way, I will reject it when it's done.
Good point. All right. Prior to bidding or commencing the work, there should be a site visit to, correlate the existing conditions and coordinate observations with the contract documents. Again, the contractor is responsible for directing and supervising the work, not the architect. Our obligation is to not control means, methods, techniques, or sequences or procedures for all portions of work. That's going to be the contractor's responsibility. Again, the contractor's responsibility is to inspect that work, make sure that the phase of work that's currently to be completed is ready for the next subsequent portions of the work. So if they're painting a wall, they need to make sure that the drywall mud is properly prepared, and if there's primers that are required, that is accomplished, or cleaning is done. Contractors also are required to arrange for inspections required by the authorities having jurisdiction, or prepare the initial punch list. These are things that are important. We'll talk about the punch list as part of the closeout documents. Next. The owner's responsibility. Basically, the owner is responsible to provide the survey. Very important for you to remember that. It's not the architect's responsibility, but it's the owner's responsibility to provide that. They may contract the architect engineer to do that survey or provide it, but it's the owner's obligation under his contract. There may also be work that's completed by other trade contractors or specialty contractors that are hired by the owner, and that needs to be coordinated with the contractor. Next. Authorities having jurisdiction. Basically, they oversee the safety and welfare of the public. They, again, are not responsible for the means and methods. They are only there to review the work relative to the codes and ordinances. So they're not safety inspectors necessarily. They're not in charge of means and methods. They are simply there to protect the safety and welfare of the public, as we noted. Next slide. Meetings. Effective meetings are an important part of QA/QC. Provides an opportunity for the attendees to share information and coordinate their work. The meeting's purpose basically is to resolve issues and coordinate work activities and schedule deliveries. Effective meetings, it's important to use this term or have this, understand this term POW, purpose, agenda, and limit on time. So if you have an agenda-driven meeting, it's going to go much quicker. Document discussions and utilize action item lists for tracking assigned tasks. And again, make sure that those meeting minutes are issued timely. Next. The meetings are generally outlined in the Division 1 specifications. There are pre-construction meetings. There's also meetings that are required for pre-construction of certain activities. For example, if you've got polished concrete, you may have a pre-construction meeting specific to that material, or pre-construction meeting for the roofing. So the Division 2 through 49 specifications may also outline pre-installation meetings or requirements and mock-ups for review. Again, the pre-construction meetings establish the ground rules for communication, explain administrative procedures, address issues about the use of the site and staging. The progress meetings are a forum for discussion of pertinent matters and facility coordination and administration. The contractor and subcontractors will have their own meetings, and generally those have contractual issues and may involve safety, but the contractor and subcontractors are the key people that will be attending those safety meetings, not the architect. We've talked about pre-installation meetings. They may be focused on specific concerns and do not relieve the contractor's responsibility to coordinate the work. May also include, review of a mock-up. Closeout meetings are meetings that talk about the closeout procedures for the project, including substantial completion, the owner's beneficial use of completed spaces, or warranty reviews, and are basically the last coordination effort that takes place before all these documents are submitted. Next. There may be some other meetings that take place. You may have a special meeting with the fire marshal or the authorities having jurisdiction. If you have USGBC requirements that you're trying to comply with, there'll be third-party sustainable design certification meetings. So just be aware that there are other meetings that may take place. The owner may schedule a meeting to address coordination of their subcontractors or the furniture move-in or select colors. Design builder may have meetings to address coordination between contractor and AE. So it just depends on the contract delivery process or method that you're using. Next. Responsibilities during construction. These are the responsibilities that are generally outlined in the A201 that are for the owner, and make sure you commit these to memory. The owner has the right to stop the work, carry out the work, or right to perform the construction themselves, the right to clean. So those are all important aspects to the owner's responsibility as well as paying for the project. They also have the right to terminate without cause. Facility manager is going to be integral to the total project commission process or commissioning process. That's noted, that's in red. You may want to put a circle around that because it's very likely there's going to be a question related about this. They need to be familiar with the construction documents, but they, again, don't direct the construction work. The AE, again, observes the work periodically and performs inspections for substantial completion and final completion, and interprets the contract documents, certifies the pay application. But again, you'll see in this list where the AE cannot stop the work. Very important. Next. Contractor is going to, key here is furnishing competent supervision, provides construction project management, reviews the contract documents, follows procedures, that are outlined in the contract. One of the important concepts in the owner-architect or owner-contractor agreement is that the superintendent cannot be changed without the owner's approval. So if you read the A201, you'll see where that's outlined in there. Next. You can see the contractor is responsible for quality control and quality assurance, paying the subcontractors, furnishing submittals we've talked about. So these are all issues and contractor responsibilities, including safety, which is at the top of the list. Some contractors are bound by the same provisions of the owner-contractor agreement through flow-down language. So you'll see in a subcontract agreement where that's subservient to the owner-contract agreement. Provides the work that the contractor doesn't self-perform and may or may not furnish materials. That's something to be aware of. Next. Suppliers usually do not furnish on-site labor, so that's a variance and just understanding what their role is. They may provide a product representative to visit or train the installers. They may also review the project when it's completed for compliance with the manufacturer's regulations or requirements. That's often the case for a roofing application. Consultants, again, they have a flow down language in their contractual agreement with the architect or the owner through their prime agreement. So the same type of flow down language occurs, and they have the same duties and responsibilities. The authorities having jurisdiction, often there may be multiple agencies. In the state of Florida, you have fire marshal and building inspector, the elevator inspector, but they have no contractual relationships with the project participants, and that's an important concept to understand. Testing agencies and inspectors, you may have sustainable design certification agencies. Independent testing and inspections are often going to be required as part of the quality control and quality assurance for the project. Next. Commissioning authority. This is a very important slide for you to remember this concept and know the difference between total project commissioning and building systems commissioning. The total project commissioning is part of the project team from the beginning, meaning the facility manager is going to be part of that project team from the beginning, from the project inception to the end. And building system commissioning might be a test and balance report for the HVAC system. So there's some nuances that are there. Just make sure you understand the definition and difference between those. Next. Product representative may not have direct contract with the AE after the contract is awarded without permission of the GC on matters specific to the project. So the product representative kind of has to disengage themselves from the AE where they had a strong relationship maybe during the design phase. They now have an obligation and a fiduciary responsibility to the contractor. So product representatives, you need to make sure that you don't get sideways with the contractor by going around them and talking with the AE directly. So if you think back on the lines of communications then that we talked about earlier, this is very important. Next. Again, product representatives might be individuals that they're hired by an independent company or they're hired directly by the manufacturer. They need to be resources for information, but again, not directing construction work. Construction by the owner or by a separate contract. It's not uncommon for an owner to have separate contracts for furniture or maybe security systems or specialty things that take place. And the owner is responsible for coordinating that work with the contractor, and so work by the owner's contractors have to work with the project contractor, the general contractor, to make sure that work is done seamlessly. Next.
And a note to remember that the architect can easily get drug into that coordination, but it is the owner's responsibility to coordinate their own work.
Okay, next. All right, so this is kind of the review outline. And Don, if there's any questions, maybe you and I can field them.
There was a question, or really a comment, and I think you addressed it well in one of the later slides about the fact that submittals are constantly used to modify the contract and allow substitution. Sometimes the owner is directing them, and what should one do to prevent this from shortcut from occurring?
Well, the best procedure is to make sure that in your Division 1 sections that you have the substitution procedures in the form, and that you, as the construction administrator or the architect of record, insist on that process being followed. And you talk about it in the pre-construction meeting and make sure that everybody is, clearly understands what the game, plan is for that. And the use of that form, I can't emphasize enough because it saved a lot of time and energy. I mean, we as architects and engineers have done our homework and specified products or multiple products, And if the contractor wants to propose a substitution because it's going to cost less money, then that needs to be documented, and it needs to be reviewed and accepted, and it needs to be approved by the subcontractor and the contractor.
Okay. Thank you, Chip. Those are all our questions. And so, Chip, thank you again for a great presentation, and we'll see everybody next week.
Before we hang up, Don, I just wanted to let everybody know that we'll be sending out a link for an online mock exam in the near future. So we want to let everybody know that.
Thank you.